All rise, please.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Butler, can we turn now to the officer who we know as HN 155? We have had evidence that he was living a full alternative lifestyle undercover. Did he tell you that?
What do you mean by full, sir?
Well, getting stoned? Did he ever mention that to you?
He didn't.
We have heard evidence from his risk assessors that he told them that he had had sexual contact with activists. Did he tell you that?
No.
What impression did he give you about how he was conducting himself undercover?
I got to know this officer quite well. I realised he was quite well in with his group. But he didn't give me any reason to suspect that his behaviour was anything to cause concern.
Do you think that if he had been doing those things, sex and drugs, he would have told you?
No.
Because it would have led to trouble for him?
Certainly.
Can we turn to HN 67?
Which, sir?
67. I think it may be one of the names that's been added at the end.
Can't find 67.
Right, we'll come back to that after the break then. In your witness statement, you say, as far as I was concerned, then and now, the SDS provided a terrific service, trouble-free. In the light of the evidence from officers such as Vince Harvey, who has accepted he slept with 4 women, and HN 21, who's accepted he slept with 1 woman, does that remain your view?
Vince Harvey, I can't comment on because I'm fairly certain I had very little to do with him at all. I can't remember him being on the squad at the same time. Possibly he did. No, my view would have changed. I considered I was extremely lucky. I had a couple of years working with a very successful team who presented no problems, and I suspected were doing nothing untoward.
And now that you do know not only about the two officers that I have just identified, but about the problems with the SDS more generally, which led to this inquiry being set up, what is your view?
Well, I'd probably want to wait for the final report before I comment, but it would seem that if those positions are correct, that officers were having affairs, then I'm disappointed, and had I known, I would have dealt with it differently.
Can I move now to the assumption of positions of responsibility, where in your witness statement you say that there was definitely a balance to be struck, and you talk about crossing the line between acceptable recording roles and unacceptable direction setting and incitement. I'd like to explore that by reference to some examples. Can we start with HN 96, please? He was, we know, the district book organiser for a branch of the SWP, and said that he was advised not to become too prominent. Can you recall whether it was you who gave him that advice or not?
I can't recall.
What is your view of assuming the role of district book organiser for the Socialist Workers' Party?
I'm not quite sure what that would entail, but it would seem that that would be within the parameters of acceptable UCO operations.
Because?
Because he didn't seem to be formulating their policy or directing them towards unlawful acts.
If we could have up, please, on the screen MPS-0745-772 at page 41. This is HN 96's witness statement, and I want to read to you a passage about what he did within Tom. It starts at paragraph 199. Hackney was a particularly active branch of the Tom, in the sense that there were a lot of active and enthusiastic members. A number of its members were on the National Steering Committee. At some point during my time on the Tom, there was a vacancy to join the National Steering Committee. The post that was available was that of Membership and Affiliation Secretary, and I believe it was decided that post had to be filled by a member of the Hackney branch of the Tom. At paragraph 16 of my impact statement dated the 19th of September 2017, I stated that I was National Secretary of the Tom. That is incorrect. Having reviewed the contents of my witness pack, I can see that the correct title for the role that I undertook in the Tom was Membership and Affiliation Secretary. I was put forward for the post at a meeting of Hackney Tom, and I accepted. I came into possession of meeting minutes in that way. Normally, I would have shied away from a position like that out of concern. Where's that gone? That it would draw too much attention to me. But I decided that undertaking the role would give me a closer insight into the things that the Tom were doing. The nomination came out of the blue, so I did not have the opportunity to discuss it with my managers beforehand. I spoke to them about it as soon as I could after my nomination had happened. I remember them being pleased. Can you recall whether you were pleased with HN 96's deployment into Tom?
I can't remember.
If you can't remember, can I ask you in the abstract, would becoming the Membership and Affiliation Secretary of Tom be something that the SDS would regard as a good thing?
Yes.
And why?
Because it would give greater access to membership and administrative things like that without putting him into a position which would be against SDS policy.
This was a position that gave him a seat on the National Steering Committee. And if the name is anything to go by, wouldn't that be dangerous territory for your policy?
It depends what you did on that committee. If you were the membership and affiliation secretary, I don't see how that could compromise him.
Do you recall speaking to HN 96 about this at all?
No, I don't.
Do you think that you would have done?
Possibly, I don't recall.
And if you had known, what do you think you would have said to him?
I would have ensured that he was comfortable with that position, that he didn't think that it would draw too much attention to him and make his position too difficult.
Would there be circumstances in which you'd tell him to resign from that position?
If after our discussions he indicated to me that it could be difficult for him, then I'd urge him to resign, yes.
But if he didn't speak up, you would have been quite happy for him to remain on the National Steering Committee of Tom?
I would have assumed that he was comfortable in that position and wasn't going against any of our principles, so I would have been happy, yes.
Can we go back to HN 155, please? He obtained a position in the headquarters of the Socialist Workers' Party. Can you recall that?
I do.
And what was your view of him working in the SWP HQ?
Having spoken to him, he felt comfortable in that position and he assured me that there were no problems, and I supported him.
And was the product of him being in that position well received?
It was.
Can you recall anything in particular?
No.
And can you recall whether it was well received not just by you but by others?
I can't say.
HN 126, please.
Yes.
We've got evidence that he obtained a seat on the North West London District Committee of the SWP. Can you recall that?
No.
Was that the sort of position that was considered a good thing?
Yes.
Why?
Again, because he would be in a position to identify the membership and also probably be privy to information earlier than others.
But on the district committee, he would be participating and voting on decisions about the operation of the group, wouldn't he?
I don't know what they did.
Did you try and find out?
No.
Can I move to a completely separate topic now? The wives of your undercover police officers. You visited wives at the recruitment stage?
Yes.
And that was to ensure that they understood the role, the long hours, and the weekend duties that were going to follow.
Yes.
Can you help us with the extent to which the wives were informed about what the job would entail?
I can't recall the precise details. They wouldn't have been told very much about the political activity that would be investigated. They would be told in more general terms of the, as you've described it, the long hours, the disruption of family life, the fact that their husbands would no longer be going to work 10 to 6 in a smart suit, but doing irregular hours, very untidily dressed, and to ensure that the wives understood those difficulties and were happy to support their husband in the role.
So far as the actual job was concerned, would they be told no more than that it was important work?
Exactly.
Can you recall going to the 1980 and 1981 Christmas lunches?
Yeah. Lunches?
Yes. Or were they lunches or dinners?
Dinners.
Dinners. Did you have any other contact with undercover officers' wives other than seeing them at the start of the deployment and at those 2 social occasions?
No.
Do you think that the SDS asked a great deal of the wives of undercover police officers?
Yes.
With hindsight, would more contact have been a good thing?
I can't tell, possibly.
Can I turn now to your chain of command? You've named Derek Neal, Ken Pride and Geoffrey Craft as chief superintendents in S Squad various times.
Yes.
That you were in the SDS and in various roles. Did it help having former SDS managers as your superiors?
I wasn't aware that they were.
Did they never say so?
They didn't.
Did you ever get the sense that they knew about the unit and what was going on?
Probably Jeff Craft did. The others I didn't see very much of.
How much contact did you have with your superiors?
Not very much. We were left to our own devices mainly. I reported to Jeff Craft on a fairly regular basis, but there wasn't an awful lot of face-to-face, more telephone contact.
This is because you'd moved to Vincent Square.
Indeed.
Did you feel a bit remote?
I don't think remote's the word. I think it was good to be away from the yard. For the sort of duties we were performing.
Was there any criticism of the SDS from your superiors whilst you were serving in the SDS?
The only criticism I can recall is by Jeff Craft on the subject of overtime.
Okay, on that. If there's anything specific, please don't mention the names of any anonymous officers.
Yes.
Anything other than the criticism of overtime?
I can't recall anything, no.
Can we move now to some of the annual reports from your stint in the SDS? We'll start with 1979, please. It's tab 11, sir. MPS-0728-963. And once we've got that up, that's just the covering letter. Can we go to page 7, please, in the file? Now, at the bottom of paragraph 1, It says that information obtained from this delicate source has allowed a realistic assessment to be made of numbers likely to be involved in extreme left-wing and anarchist demonstrations and the probable intentions of the participants, enabling uniformed police officers to be appropriately deployed to frustrate planned disorder and safeguard property. Intelligence gained on individual members of extremist organisations is always invaluable to special branch officers in both the Metropolitan Police District and the provinces, and to the security service. In what ways was individual intelligence valuable to special branch?
Well, individuals make up the group, and if you're reporting that a group is about to cause public disorder, then it's important that you know who the individuals in that group are.
What does that tell you over and above the fact that there's going to be disorder?
Well, you'll know, for example, who some of the people involved will be.
And how does that help?
It may well be that arrests need to be made if disorder is serious enough, and you may need to identify some of those causing those disorder and offences.
Well, presumably, in a public disorder situation, police arrest those who are being disorderly.
Well, very often arrests are made subsequent to the event.
Can we move to page 10, please, and paragraph 9? And that reads, a general election held in May was the focal point of intensive activity by several extremist parties. The Socialist Workers' Party eschewed contesting any constituency in favour of a policy of confronting the National Front during the latter party's election campaign. The SWP contrived to make use of all public meetings arranged by the National Front to arouse anti-fascist feeling. The death of Blair Peach, an active supporter of the Anti-Nazi League, which was a consequence of a violent anti-fascist demonstration in Southall, provided the extreme left wing with an opportunity to mount a sustained campaign to discredit and criticise the police. Information supplied by SDS staff was of great value in enabling uniformed officers to deal effectively with the public order problems which arose both during the period before the election and on subsequent demonstrations held in connection with the death of Peach. Can I start first of all with the phrase, a sustained campaign to discredit and criticise the police? Was that the way that you viewed what was happening?
I can't remember now. If I wrote it, then presumably it's what I thought at the time.
Do you now think that what happened in the light of Blair Peach's death was a sustained campaign to discredit and criticise the police?
I haven't really given it any thought.
Were the Metropolitan Police interested in obtaining intelligence on campaigns to discredit and criticise the police?
Not as such, I don't think, no.
Why were they interested then in the Blair Peach campaign?
I can only suppose the interest was to obtain intelligence about possible demonstrations and disorderly conduct.
If the police weren't interested in campaigns to discredit and criticise them, why is that referred to in the report?
I can't remember.
Can you recall whether or not there was any public disorder following the death of Blair Peach?
No, I can't remember.
Did you consider that the Blair Peach campaign was something that your bosses would be interested in intelligence about?
Only if it involved potential disorder, not a campaign per se.
Did you know that these reports were going to go to the senior chain of command and to inform decisions on future funding of the SDS?
No, I had no idea about the funding issue.
Did you think the Home Office would be interested in intelligence about the Blair Peach campaign?
I don't know that I considered it.
We have had evidence of very little trouble indeed arising from the Friends of Blair Peach campaign. Is it possible that this report was written in the way it was because the Blair Peach issue was thought to be a big deal and it would be a good thing to make the SDS appear to be an important part of policing the campaign?
I can't recall why that was included in the report.
Can we take that down, please? And can we have up UCPI 5013539? And if we could have that expanded, please. 5th of November 1979, the following information has been received from a reliable source. Privacy has resigned from the Socialist Workers' Party, but is to maintain her interest in women's voice and the Anti-Nazi League. Submitted herewith is a photograph of her taken during the funeral of Blair Peach in London on the 13th of June 1979. It shows a good likeness of the subject. Do you know whether or not SDS officers took photographs at the funeral?
I wasn't aware of that, no.
This report crosses the SDS desks at a time when you are in the SDS. Did the fact that a photograph taken at the funeral was being used to identify an activist cause you any concern?
I'm not even sure if I saw this report.
If we scroll down, please. Is that Ferguson's signature at the bottom?
I don't know. It's not mine.
Does it cause you any concern now that a photograph was taken at the funeral and then used by the SDS to identify an activist?
Yes, I think it would be inappropriate at a funeral to do that.
Do you know anything about the anonymous officer we call HN41 giving a witness statement to police about his presence at the demonstration in Southall?
No.
Would you accept that this was a justice campaign which actually in the end did secure some justice for Blair Peach?
I can't remember.
If we could take that down now, please. If we could go to the 1980 report, it's tab 18, sir, MPS-0728-962. And if we could go to page 8, please, and look at paragraphs 16 and 17. 16 reads, predictably, the anti-nuclear movement was active throughout the year with various nuclear-related policies coming under attack. The transportation of nuclear waste and the sighting of cruise missiles in the United Kingdom provided focal points for demonstrations mounted in London. In East Lothian, the protests continued against the building of a nuclear power station at Torness Point, and demonstrations were held in May and on a smaller scale in August. SDS officers were present on both occasions, and the information passed to the Lothian and Borders Police was useful in preventing serious disorder and damage to property. Was the SDS activity in relation to Torness one of its major achievements of 1980?
Possibly, yes.
And if we go to 17, anti-fascist activity continued to tax the resources of the Metropolitan Police, and in February, March, April and June there were right-wing marches which attracted counter-demonstrations from many sections of the revolutionary left, the Trotskyist Socialist Workers' Party playing a principal role. The midsummer period was quiet, and the last sizable opposed demonstration occurred in November, when about 700 members of the British movement marched in the Paddington area and were confronted by some 1,900 counter-demonstrators. SDS information was supplied in respect of all these marches. Is it right to say that confrontations between the far left and the far right were the biggest single public order problem the SDS had to report upon in 1980?
Probably, I can't remember.
This paragraph starts, anti-fascist activity continued to tax the resources of the Metropolitan Police. Why is it phrased so as to put the emphasis on the anti-fascists rather than confrontations between the far left and the far right?
I've no idea.
Was there a feeling that it was the far left who were more to blame than the far right?
It depends what you mean by blame. The ones most likely to cause serious disorder, it was felt, were the far left.
And what do you mean by cause?
Create.
How?
By attacking those they opposed, and also the police, who were generally a good target for all demonstrators.
Presumably you were well aware at the time that there were a lot of racist attacks on the streets mounted by the far right.
Probably.
And that so far as public order is concerned, it takes two to tango.
Yes, I don't think the job of the SDS was to try and predict individual racist attacks. That's a crime dealt with by police, by uniform or CID. The SDS was more interested in large-scale serious disorder.
But was it not outrage at some of these attacks which prompted the demonstrations that led to public order problems?
I've never tried to view the problems from the viewpoint of the extreme left, but I accept that's probably right.
Could we take down this report, please, and move to 1981? So that's at tab 44 of your bundle. It's MPS-0728-985. And again, we've got the covering letter at the start. So if we could go to page 4, please. And on this first page, we see at paragraph 2 the coverage section of the report, which lists on that page various Trotskyist groups insofar as we've been able to publish them. Could you hold in your mind, please, Women's Voice? And if we go over the page, to page 5, more groups under the anarchist, can you bear in mind Freedom Collective, under pro-Irish, Tom, then anti-nuclear on the next page. We have CND amongst a number of anti-nuclear groups. Could we now go to page 7? And if we look at the paragraph at the top of the page, paragraph 7, that reads, "The question of security of the SDS is and always has been of paramount importance for the personal protection of the field officers and to prevent embarrassment to the Commissioner by its existence becoming public knowledge. To this end, every possible precaution is taken to ensure the security of the headquarter flats and the officers' individual cover flats. Careful attention is paid to ensuring that every operational officer's cover is as secure as possible before he enters the field. The political sensitivity of the SDS operation is fully recognised by all officers concerned. The attempted penetration of an organisation is never undertaken unless such action can be fully justified on the basis of the Commissioner's responsibility for the preservation of public order in the metropolis." First of all, going back to the third line, what was the embarrassment to the Commissioner that was feared?
Well, I suppose the fact that an undercover unit existed, which the police had never openly disclosed, might cause the Commissioner embarrassment.
Why would using undercover police officers cause embarrassment?
Perhaps embarrassment isn't the word, perhaps criticism. It might be that he wouldn't be embarrassed by the criticism and would bat it off, but it's just a word.
Was the concern that what was being reported on was political activity and it would be embarrassing for it to emerge that police officers were going undercover to report upon political activists?
That's not what is meant by that paragraph, no.
Well, can you help me any further as to what is meant by that?
As I've just explained, the actual existence of this doesn't refer back to those particular groups. This is talking about the security of the SDS generally.
Yes.
And I think the mere fact that something is secret and its existence is not to be known outside a very limited circle, then its disclosure probably would cause embarrassment.
Well, if we take, for example, undercover police officers who are infiltrating drugs gangs, or serious organised criminal groups. There's no embarrassment on the part of the police that it does those things, is there?
No, but I think it's probably generally accepted by the public that such undercover officers have been employed for many years. What isn't known is that attempts to manage public disorder attracted the same type of policing.
And there may be a concern that the public wouldn't accept that.
I don't think there is, but it could embarrass the Commissioner.
Can we move down to the words political sensitivity of the SDS operation is fully recognised? Is that a reference to the matters that we've just been discussing?
Yes, I think so.
And then it goes on to say the attempted penetration of an organisation is never undertaken unless such action can be fully justified on the basis of the Commissioner's responsibility for the preservation of public order in the metropolis. This is at the point at which I want to come back to some of the groups that I asked you to keep in mind. Women's Voice, was that really a public order threat?
Until I reread this report, annual report, I must say I've never heard of them. I couldn't recall them at all. So they possibly weren't a public order threat.
And were members of the Freedom Collective really a public order threat?
Again, I don't know who they are.
Presumably you will remember the campaign for nuclear disarmament.
Of course.
It's right to say they put very large numbers of people on the streets, but isn't it also right to say that their demonstrations were very well stewarded and entirely peaceful?
Yes, as I replied earlier this morning, they were quite often infiltrated by extremists who wanted to use their well-organised demonstrations for their own purposes.
But the public order actuality was that they weren't causing public disorder, were they?
The CND core members, no, but splinter groups within them could well try and incite them to commit offences.
But was the mere possibility that somebody might try and incite a group which was in fact stewarding perfectly orderly demonstrations really sufficient fully to justify infiltration to preserve public order?
I think a lot of these groups were infiltrated or examined incidentally as part, because we didn't have enough officers to infiltrate all those groups. They were reported on because they attended the same meetings or demonstrations as the groups the SDA officers were covering.
In the case of CND, though, as we discussed earlier, HN65 was deployed into CND, wasn't he?
I think that's the officer we're talking about as I was leaving.
Yes.
I had no dealings with anybody reporting back on the CND.
Can we move now to page 9? Paragraph 18. The Socialist Workers' Party, under the guise of the Right to Work campaign, continued throughout the year to organise pickets, occupations and marches as protests against unemployment and cuts in public expenditure. Their most noteworthy adventure was a march 8 to the 16th of October 1981 from Liverpool to the Conservative Party conference in Blackpool, where some 5,000 persons took part in an anti-Tory demonstration. Lancashire Police have placed on record their appreciation of the assistance rendered by the SDS in connection with this event. Can you help me? First of all, how much do you recall of the 1981 Right to Work March?
I remember it, but I can't remember anything about it.
Can you recall that HN 155 was the treasurer that year for the Right to Work campaign?
I can't remember whether he was or not.
Can you recall whether or not there was trouble outside the Conservative Party conference on that occasion?
No, I can't remember.
Thank you. Can that be taken down, please? I want to move now to the Home Office. You have said in your witness statement that you had lunch with an individual from the Home Office about once a month. Can you help us with the rank and position within the Home Office of the person with whom you had lunch?
No, I can't remember who he was.
Do you have any idea whether he was a senior official or a very junior official?
No, I can only assume by his age and demeanour that he was reasonably senior.
At whose initiative did these meetings take place?
I don't know. I don't know whether I continued this practice of meeting them or whether it was set up while I was a manager. I can't recall.
Can you remember whether, or do you know whether the initiative had come from the SDS
No.
or from the Home Office?
No, I've no idea.
What was the purpose of the meetings?
They were very much social meetings. I can't remember what else was, what might have been discussed in business terms, but a colleague and I would meet this chap for a beer and a lunch. I can't really remember what the reason was.
Being careful not to mention any anonymous names, who was your colleague who attended the meetings with you?
It would be a fellow manager. It wouldn't be one of the undercover officers.
All rise, please.
I have made, and there will be printed, a formal restriction order prohibiting the disclosure or publication of anything stated in the hearing room between the times 2:51 and 1 second p.m. and 2:52 and 4 seconds p.m., so that everybody knows what may not be broadcast. I will identify the questions and answers immediately before the passage that may not be broadcast. Mr. Barr asked, can you recall if the Home Office imparted any information to you in these meetings? Answer, no. Mr. Barr, no, you can't remember, or no, they didn't. Answer, no, they didn't. What then follows, up until the passage that, with a bit of luck, I will read in a moment, may not be published or disclosed, either now or at any time. I'm going, I'm afraid, to have to seek help to move the screen down. Yeah. Mr. Barr's next question was, I'm sorry, the next question, which you may publish or disclose by Mr. Barr, was, if I can now move on to vetting, could we have up on the screen, please? Then he refers to the number. Now, if we look there, there is an entry under vetting. He reads it. Do you know anything about that? No, I don't. So it is, and I hope you understand what I've said, the questions and answers in between those two passages that may not be published or disclosed. They will in due course be redacted from the day's transcript, so as to make it perfectly clear. The order that I have made may seem curious to you, but it is important that it is obeyed. It is important not merely for the inquiry and for other interests, but also your own, because were it to be breached, then the consequences for anyone found to have breached it could include reference to the High Court for proceedings for contempt of court, which could result in serious penalties for anyone found to have been in contempt of court. Can we now proceed?
Thank you, sir. Mr. Butler, can you answer this very specific question? Did Mike Ferguson assume a position of responsibility within the anti-apartheid movement when he was an undercover police officer?
I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you. That was my last question. There'll be a break now. Yes, we had almost got to the end. Whilst we see whether anybody else wishes to propose questions.
The mirth is entirely understandable, but the purpose of the break is to permit anyone who wishes Mr. Barr to ask any further questions of this witness to do so, and therefore may serve a useful purpose. We rise for 20 minutes, please.
All rise, please.
Mr. Barr, before you begin, I understand that the formal orders which I made and announced before are now on the table in front of those to whom they apply. Thank you. Mr. Barr.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Butler, can I ask you about a specific area of expenses? Can you help us with what the policy was for undercover officers reclaiming expenses, first of all, for alcoholic drinks which they had bought to consume themselves during the course of their undercover duties?
They wouldn't be allowed to claim for alcohol unless it formed a small part of a substantial meal. They were allowed to claim expenses by way of subsistence for food, but not for alcohol alone.
Can you help us with what the policy was for claiming the cost of alcohol bought for the activists who they were spying upon?
I can't actually recall those sorts of claims. The officers had to regularly submit a diary which included claims for expenses based on what they've been doing and expenses incurred. I can't specifically recall them claiming for alcohol for other people. It might have been shown as an incidental expense, but I can't really recall.
Can you recall in general terms, first of all, whether you had any impression of how much alcohol undercover officers were drinking whilst undercover?
I would say most of them drank regularly, but not excessively. They all drove, and driving was an exceedingly important part of their duties. So whilst when we met, we usually had a beer. But as I say, with the fact that they wouldn't want to be in a position of drunkenness in the company of their group, nor would they want to run the risk of drink driving. So I would say their drinking was fairly regular, but not excessive.
Did you have any concerns that any of them might have been drinking, first of all, to a level which might have impaired their judgment?
No.
And secondly, to have affected their welfare in the longer term?
I didn't know.
Were you concerned that activists might have been bought rather a lot of drinks by undercover officers?
I never gave that any thought, no.
Did you give that any thought in that you didn't care how much they bought for activists, or did you mean it in some other sense?
In some other sense.
In what sense?
That I never gave it any consideration. I assumed that if you're going to be part of a group, you would stand your ground, but you wouldn't buy excessive drinks just because you could afford to.
Can I ask you now, I think we've provided the real name, not to be uttered, of course, of HN67. Do you have that?
No, I couldn't find 67.
Right. Is that in the... where the post-it note is?
I don't have the book at the moment.
Right, well, that's a cast iron excuse.
Thank you. Thank you.
The question is, did you ever hear any suggestion that HN67 had fathered a child with an activist?
Not at all.
Any joking to that effect?
Certainly not.
Any rumours?
No.
Did you know HN67?
Yes.
In terms of what you knew about him, do you think he is a sort of man who might have had sex with an activist?
That does surprise me. I didn't think he... but then, who knows?
Can I ask you now a question? I want you to answer yes, no. Did you ever give any consideration to providing cover girlfriends for your undercover officers?
No.
Did you ever expressly ask any of your undercover officers if they had had any form of sexual contact with anybody in their undercover identity?
No.
Did you ever ask any of them whether they had come under any pressure to indulge in sexual activity?
No.
Finally, you say in your witness statement that you were called into the office at the end of your tour in the SDS, and in the conversation where you were told you would be moving on, there was something to the effect that if you stayed longer, you might lose your objectivity and always side with the undercover police officers. Without going into the specifics of any particular issue, what was your superior's concern?
I don't know. He didn't tell me. He just said, it's time for you to move. He didn't use quite your language, but you sum it up well. He said, you're getting too close to the undercover officers.
Again, without mentioning any specific issues, had you found yourself fighting their corner with him or other senior managers?
Not with him. He was above the escort office.
But I'm taking from your answer, you might have done with another senior manager.
Possibly.
Is this, again, don't go into any details if the answer's no, but is this the overtime issue?
Yes.
Again, without being specific, anything else?
No.
I'm sure you'll be very pleased that's the very last of my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Is there any re-examination?
Nothing for us, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Then I'm afraid with rather a lot of interruptions, that concludes your evidence. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, sir.
That now concludes this stage of the inquiry's hearings. When we will meet again remains to be seen.